Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of Inside Austin's Agenda. I'm your host, Grace Reeder, and I'm joined today by Austin City Council member Ryan Alter.
Yes.
First and foremost, I want to know if you slept at all last week, if you've caught up. Did you get any Memorial Day sleep?
It was a busy week last week, but 3-day weekend couldn't come at a better time. So.
No kidding. So talk first, let's back way up for folks who have not been following. We were talking every day last week about cap and stitch.
Yeah.
Explain first for folks who are not following along what cap and stitch is.
Yeah, so this is something that really we've been working on for years. Going back with the I-35 expansion, part of the discussion was whether or not we wanted to put what we have called caps, which are just kind of decks on top of the road where you could put green spaces or public buildings, fields, things that the public could use, but that's more than a highway. And so that conversation has been going along for quite some time. It all came to a head last week on making the decision of which of these we wanted to actually fund and move forward with.
So talk about where other cities may have these and kind of what they're going to look like.
So people might be most familiar with the Clyde Warren Park in Dallas. That is a example of one of these caps. You also have a very large one in Boston, the Rose Kennedy Greenway. Denver has done this. I think Atlanta has done this, Seattle. So it's something that definitely communities have done to improve their highway areas, kind of make it, once again, more than a highway for the community. And no one has regretted it, which is why we really wanted to do as much as we could to bring this to Austin and create this space for the public.
So I want to be really clear for folks, because one of the confusions I heard was this highway expansion in the first place is not an Austin project, it's a TxDOT project. This is Austin's response to that. So walk through what TxDOT is doing and why this is different than that.
That's right. So TxDOT is the one who's in charge of the I-35 expansion, and part of that is dropping the highway, kind of sinking it into the ground and creating this opportunity to potentially put these caps on it. But TxDOT is not funding or just, it was not for them to put it on the top, and that's what they decided. We would have loved for them to pay for it,
sure.
But they said our job is to expand the highway. If you guys want to put something more on it, then that's up to you. So TxDOT is doing that. The upper deck is coming down between 15th and Airport, and this whole highway is going to be sunken, which is going to be in and of itself an improvement to what we have right now. But the question for us was, do we want to do more? Do we want to better connect east and west, especially in the downtown area where you have had a highway that has really divided a city for almost a century along economic and racial lines? And so we wanted to try to do the opposite, bring our communities together through these public spaces.
So this is going to go in stages. This is not the last time that you all are going to have to talk about committing funding to TxDOT. Walk me through the stages you all have.
Yes, unfortunately this is just the first part of a very long discussion, but what you have to decide first and foremost is which of these sections do you want to cap, and what you have to fund is what's called the roadway elements. Think of those, the walls, the columns, the things that are going to support the caps. So that was the decision we had to make last week, is which of these areas did we want to cap and had to commit to those roadway elements. And what was really different about this decision than most decisions we make is there's no going back. Once they build a column, we can't come back 30 years from now and say, oh, we want to make that one bigger or put another one here. It is now or not again for 60 to 100 years. And that's really daunting. That's a big job for us to decide the next 100 years of this highway. But that was the decision we made last week. Now, next year, we're going to decide which of these caps do we actually want to fund. And I don't think we're going to do them all at once. They are very expensive. But we can start delivering this amenity to the public in stages, and I think that's what we're going to do.
So last week, you all were scrambling to put together all kinds of proposals. This is the first time I've really seen City Council so split down the middle that y'all were in sub-quorums. So walk me through how last week went.
Yeah, there really were two kind of competing visions for the caps. One group, the group that I was in, really felt it was important to do as much as we could to realize that this is a generational project that is an opportunity that shouldn't be squandered. Yes, it is very expensive, but the cost of doing nothing was even greater. And then you had another group who did want to do something, but really a very scaled back version. I think some in that group even potentially didn't want to do any of it. And I get that. It's really an expensive proposal. But this kind of conversation came down to a cost question, and that's where we really kind of came to a head, because on the one side they were saying, well, you can either do the caps or pay for affordable housing or have parks or invest in libraries. And that really was a false choice. We had the opportunity to look at other funding sources, and that's what our group was really focused on. How can we come up with creative ways to fund these that wouldn't cost taxpayers, not through property taxes or sales taxes, but kind of more visitor taxes that could be used. And those are things that we put forward and are going to continue to work toward over the next 5 to 6 years to pay for these.
So when we're talking about cap and stitch, we also have to talk about the 2026 comprehensive bond package so that people understand why it was that you all were focusing on not taking away from that capacity. So explain to me what that bond package is and why that played such a big role in this.
Right, so every so often, 6 to 8 years, the city does a fully comprehensive bond package. That is libraries, parks, roads. We're going to have a really strong environmental component that I advocated for, and all that costs money. It costs a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, and a city can only issue so much debt, right? We try to keep a very strong credit rating that helps deliver more for taxpayers at a cheaper rate. And so what staff told us was, there's a certain amount that you could issue debt in that 2026 bond. And what the warning was if you are going to issue debt now for this cap and stitch project, that could eat away at your ability to have the bond capacity for those future projects. And that was really important, I think, to all of us, and that's why our group was really focused on how could we bring forward funding mechanisms that don't affect your debt capacity so that we can still do those other important things, not pit them against each other, but allow for us to try to do both. And the work is not done, as you mentioned. This is just the first decision. But I think we struck a really good balance on being able to preserve our future investments that we need to make while also investing in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
How did you all go about trying to find those different pots of money and having that discussion among your subquorum?
Yeah, it was hard. There are not a lot of pots of money just sitting around the city, but really trying to see what type of funds do we have that are more dedicated to transportation projects. This is more transportation related. What are kind of tourism related? And that's what kind of led us to these visitor tax type deals. It's right next to the convention center. It's a natural extension of the convention center project, recognizing that the car rental tax is something that is available to help promote whether it's tourism or quality of life in the city, but also recognizing that these are revenue streams that we couldn't just go use for, let's say, homelessness funding or to build a library or to spend on parks. They're very constrained, and so trying to shoehorn those into this project, and I think legitimately so, while also preserving our ability to meet the other demands. I think it's really important to highlight, I should have said before, part of this conversation has been the city's in this huge budget deficit. How could you ever consider spending this much money when we're already facing a deficit? The deficit that we face is wholly separate from this project. That is an operating, comes from the property tax and sales tax base of our budget. This project is infrastructure. That comes from debt, and the state law is very, very clear that you can't commingle. So it's not, a dollar that we invest in the caps is a dollar we're not investing in homelessness services or something else that is going to be impacted by our budget deficit. They are completely different and should be thought about differently. That's
a good note. I hear people talk about that a lot, quite a regular comparison. So now that we've kind of walked through the path that took you all to the final version, talk about what it is that you all actually approved on Thursday.
Yeah, so we came to a compromise, which is great. Not everybody you don't get everything you want in a compromise, but I think we really struck a great balance. And what that balance is the Cesar Chavez all the way to 7th Street we're going to cap. So 7 blocks that is going to be acres of new downtown public space, which is really going to be amazing once it's built. another cap at 11th to 12th Street, which really recognizes the African American heritage and history that, once again, as talking before, we really segregated our community with I-35 and trying to bridge that area. That is a natural connection back into downtown. And then the north. The north was one of the more heated areas of discussion, and part of that is because it was the most expensive. These were huge areas, but they're also very large price tag. And what we ultimately did was, instead of doing a full cap, we took what are called stitches, which are 300-foot wide, so a football field wide connection, and did 2 of those. One along the red line, which is going to be really neat because it helps connect the northern side, the airport side, where right now it's really difficult and dangerous to get across I-35. That's going to be a great connection there. And then on the south side of the red line as well, being able to have Hancock and where it is now the Fiesta be able to connect. And then another connection at 41st Street, a 300-foot connection, which once again will be a space where it can be green space. I've had people mention like a cafe or just something that the public can really enjoy in that space that helps bring those communities together.
So altogether, the price tag you all put on that was $104 million.
Right.
How is the city going to fund those things?
So what we decided was we got a loan from the state. It's a $41 million loan. And then we authorized the other $63 million in debt kind of as a placeholder. I also brought forward a resolution that instructed the city manager to come back to us next year on how he would propose to pay for it. And we gave him a list of ideas, some of those we've talked about here today. But how would you pay for it not using that debt? We want to preserve that debt for the 2026 bond, so give us your professional recommendation on how you would pay for that. And that can be things like the taxes, like car rental tax and the hotel occupancy tax we talked about. Also something called a TERS, which is a really fancy way of just saying you create kind of an area around something that you want to develop that wouldn't develop otherwise, and you allow for that community to kind of pay for it itself. There are a bunch of different ways we can be creative to come up with this financing. And another important note is, in November, all we have to pay for is another 10%, or I'm sorry, 15%. We have 6 years to pay for this, so we don't need to come with a $104 million check next November. What we have to do is just have a plan for the next 6 years.
So this was a commitment to TxDOT. The money and where it comes from can come a little bit later. City working through that right now.
That's right.
Okay,
that's
great.
A very good synopsis.
Excellent. So this is the first time again that I've seen you all split like this and have sub-quorums. What kind of rules and laws does that put in place to make it where the conversations happening behind the scenes have to be really public or scrutinized, I suppose?
Yeah, it makes it really hard. So we have rules that are in place that really do bring transparency to the process, and that's really important. But it also does kind of limit your ability to try to find that compromise in, a more closed door setting. Sometimes you do have to have that airing publicly, and that's what we did. Our group kind of came up with our ideas and we put that out there, and then the other group kind of took those ideas and responded and came up with their ideas and put that out there. And it's good for the public to be able to see, but it makes it really difficult just administratively because you can't sit down and have a conversation. You kind of have to throw your ideas up and wait and let the other side digest it and throw their ideas up, and it makes it a little more challenging.
Sure. So walk through, you all have a work session where you can talk publicly and sort of debate, but you can't take any votes. And then you will have the message board, and then you've got the meeting. So how can you use all of those to do this debate?
Yeah, so what we did was, we came up with our plan and we put it on the message board. And the message board is just a way for us to publicly kind of talk to each other that stays within the bounds of the law.
Right.
And then with that, the other subquorum kind of did the same. We came together at the work session and were able to hash out some of those differences and really kind of better understand each other. That's what I think is the biggest challenge in the limitation of talking. You can certainly raise ideas and that's pretty easy, but really having that conversation of understanding the why. Why do you feel the way you do, or what can we do to help either get you to where we are, or just at least understand so that when we're putting forward a new idea, it comes from a place that is trying to meet your needs. And the work session, we kind of worked through that a little bit, but then once again on Wednesday and even into Thursday morning had new ideas coming back on the message board, and ultimately a resolution.
You all in the work session, you and Councilmember Mike Siegel were doing some back and forth. You could tell you were both attorneys by the way that those questions were raised. But talk about how, like, what you gathered from the work session and how you applied that to what you all brought back.
Yeah, it's just really important for me to understand. I knew that they had big concerns around the debt question and preserving that, but understanding, the motivations behind this cap and not that cap, and why not the north, and just, is it all financial, or is there something inherent about these that we are not kind of understanding and either we can make a better case for, or just that's a fundamental difference that we're not going to see eye to eye on. So, you always want to be able to negotiate where you can, but if you are just at a fundamentally different place, you have to understand that too, and I think that was part of the conversation we had.
So moving forward, there's been a lot of talk about how you all get, the federal government, the state government, and the private sector to help as we move forward.
Yeah.
So what happens next to get those folks involved?
Well, that's one of the really great things about the time that we have, right? What was really important for us to, I think, make clear to the public and just really understand, which came late, was that we're not showing up with this check in November of next year. We have until 2031, 2032 to pay for that. And what that really means functionally is we have time to fundraise. We're going to have a new presidential administration. Now, the Biden administration awarded us over $100 million for this project. The Trump administration took that money back. Well, maybe in 2028 we'll have a new administration that says, yes, we want to reissue that grant. And there's a Bridging Communities grant. And so, that'd be $100 million we would gladly accept. But that also gives us time to get the philanthropy going and allows for some of these other ideas to be thought through and ultimately put into place. So that's kind of where we're headed, and that's why having that time was really important, but making this decision to preserve that option was crucial, because otherwise we would never have been able to come back and make any changes.
Is there any idea what that might look like to try to get the private sector in particular involved? We've seen Austin do similar things with like Finding Home ATX.
Mm-hmm.
What might that look like moving forward?
Yeah, this is a little different than, let's say, Finding Home ATX in that they're going to be physical spaces that, like, selling naming rights, right? Like, for one of these, you could be the such and such cap or such and such building. And that is something that is more tangible, a little easier to get philanthropic support for. But we as a community, we do have some great philanthropy, but it's still something that we need to better foster and build. You see in, Dallas and Houston, they have legacy giving, whether it's old families or kind of other big corporations that choose to give there. And we're still a little younger, right? We've got the Dell Foundation, which has given for a long time, but we're working on building a larger network that is going to contribute to Austin and enrich the city for everybody.
The other thing I do want to mention for folks is that the University of Texas has also committed to capping I-35. How does that play into the vision that Austin has?
It's big because we want to create as continuous a space as possible. And so having the university cap between, I believe it's MLK and Dean Keaton, a very significant area, is going to help create that continuity throughout this project. And they have committed to do that. We're not exactly sure when they're going to cap their portion as well, but do know it's part of their medical school expansion, and that ultimately is going to be great for the university.
So what do you hope to see along the sides now? I think, a lot of focus has been put on what gets put on top of the highway, but also the city of Austin owns quite a bit of land, especially along that 7th to 4th cap. What do you hope will happen on the sides of the highway?
Yeah, I think we have such huge opportunity being so so largely involved, having more than 50% of the land between those 4th to 7th caps. We are going to directly see a lot of these benefits, but first and foremost, APD headquarters, right? That could be something that in the redevelopment we think about how can we tie that into whatever that cap space is right there. You've got Waterloo Greenway that's coming in, and that space between Cesar Chavez all the way up to 5th Street, you know, how can we seamlessly blend that linear park into this public space and coordinate those better? You know, something as simple as recognizing we could put the bathrooms on the cap instead of in the park. It creates more integration and usability of that space, and so that's an opportunity we now have. And looking east, these caps are going to seamlessly integrate into East Austin. You're not going to have to cross any moving traffic to get into these spaces and use them. And so how can we really take that eastern portion and make it part of the community and an amenity that that area really should have, and I'm excited to see what it develops into.
I guess finally here, when might people actually see, when might the Austin Marathon be happening and we're running over a cap into East Austin?
Well, the current plan is in like 2033.
Okay.
I would love to say like 2033 or bust. You know, the reality is transportation projects take some time. I'm going to cautiously say 2035. I think 10 years from now is a realistic timeline where we can say we're going to go out and have these spaces to use for everybody.
What do you work on now that you've spent all of this time on I-35 and Captain Stitch?
You know, there's always another issue to deal with. I think what is coming forward for us really quickly is that budget question, right? We as a city are facing a large budget deficit, and we need to address that. And once again, that question has it's no better, no worse having made the cap decision. That is wholly outside of this discussion. And so we're going to be working through that in the next few months, and then really working with city management and staff to come up with that funding plan. That, you know, we asked for that plan to come back next March, and that's going to be on us before we know it. And we really need to have a firm understanding of what can we fund through any kind of revenue source that doesn't put that burden on local taxpayers.
We're already starting to see some city departments make some changes trying to adjust to the budget, and we saw one that people were pretty upset about at Barton Springs Pool. Apparently you don't mess with Barton Springs Pool hours.
My constituents especially have feelings about that.
So can you walk through what happened with that since it is tied to the budget?
Yeah, so the manager and the budget department has asked all the departments to try to save 1.5% on the current budget, just recognizing that we are over budget for this year. Try to reduce that a little bit through just any area where you might be able to save a little bit. One of the areas that the Parks and Recreation Department identified to help make that savings was this free hour between 9 and 10 o'clock at Barton Springs Pool. It's free for the public, but it still has to be staffed. So, you know, you start multiplying 10 lifeguards every single night throughout the summer. It has a real cost, and so that was a way to help cut down on that spending. I heard a lot, as I know many did, from individuals who were concerned, and I shared that concern. You know, I got the need to try to save the money, but sometimes when you save a very little amount but impact a lot of people, it's really not worth it, right? And so in this instance, speaking with the manager and staff, you know, how can we try to not, especially going into the hottest months of the year, impact people's ability to cool down and just have something that really is special to Austin? And I was glad to see that they decided this was not something they wanted to move forward with.
I saw at the end of their statement, they also said, though, moving forward, we are going to have tough budget conversations. Absolutely. What's the kind of the reality of that for people who are watching what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's time for us to make decisions on what our priorities are. You know, we can't fund everything, and that's going to be really hard because every single program has somebody who is benefited or impacted. And telling somebody that, you know, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to help you for this or that is really just hard, and it affects real people. So it's going to be on us to decide what is the primary role of our government, what are we first and foremost needing to provide in a high quality manner, and then seeing what else we can do to, you know, make the quality of life as good as we can. But that means, unfortunately, some things are not going to get funded, and that's going to be tough.
Well, before we wrap up here, is there anything else that you want people to know that's going on at the City of Austin right now, or anything else you want to chat about?
Oh boy. Luckily, we get to take this little bit of a breath before the budget, but I think we are going to have a very comprehensive and tough look as it relates to the budget, just as it relates to what we want to do and be as a city. We are really under some tight constraints from the state government of how much revenue we can bring in and what we can do. And that is just going to force us to think a little differently than we always have. We've always been a place of plenty and been able to do what we want to do and be able to have a little extra to supplement here and there, and we don't have that anymore. So either we're going to have to ask the public to help out some more, which is tough, and we recognize that, or we're going to have to really tighten our belts and say, these things that you expect of us, we can't do. And so I think it's going to be really helpful for us to have people think hard about what do you expect, what do you want out of your city, and then what's that going to cost, and are you willing to pay for it, or should we think about this a little differently?
Well, thank you for doing this. I know that last week I said, oh, we're done talking about cap and stitch, and I lied.
It's all right.
But we got to keep people updated on this. But I do appreciate you coming on and explaining
Always.
the behind the scenes. A reminder that Inside Austin's agenda airs every other Wednesday at 3 o'clock. We'll see you next time.